They all saw her as just a waitress, a girl who carried trays, wiped tables, and stayed silent while the rich laughed around her. But that night, everything changed. When a billionaire mocked her as uneducated, the entire restaurant froze, everyone expecting her to quietly endure the insult like always. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke point one language, then another, then another. And in less than 5 minutes, she didn't just silence the billionaire. She shattered his ego, his lies, and the image he built. This is the night in Invisible Girl became unstoppable. Sarah Chun had mastered the art of being unseen. T26. She moved like a soft shadow through the elite restaurant Golden Terrace, a place where billionaires argued over investments louder than they thanked the people serving them. She kept her eyes low, her steps quiet, and her voice almost non-existent. If a guest dropped a fork, she appeared. If a glass needed refilling, she was already there. But no one ever remembered her face. And that was exactly how she wanted to the world. She was the quiet girl with the tray. Nothing more. Nothing worth noticing. Behind that silence, though, lived a story no one imagined. Sarah wasn't born invisible. Life pushed her into the shadows. There were days, not so long ago, when she sat in libraries surrounded by books thicker than her arm, studying through the night because she believed dreams were earned. She had 2 degrees, both with honors. She spoke 5 languages, switching between them as effortlessly as turning a page. Her professors once told her she was destined for diplomacy, international law, something big, something that mattered. But life doesn't always reward the people who work the hardest at a family emergency, at a financial collapse, at a betrayal from someone she trusted. Piece by piece, everything she built crumbled. And when you lose too much, too quickly, survival becomes quieter than ambition. Sarah chose invisibility. She tucked her brilliance behind her apron. She hid her dreams behind polite smiles. She worked in the Golden Terrace because blending in felt safer than standing out. After all, some people don't disappear because they're weak. They disappear because the world hasn't been kind to them. And no one knew it yet, but this invisible waitress was just one moment away from being truly seen. The Golden Terrace had seen powerful people before, ministers, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, but nothing tightened the air like the arrival of Victor Kane. The moment he entered, the restaurant shifted as if gravity itself had changed. The maitre d' straightened his tie 3 times. Waiters adjusted their aprons, palms sweating. Guests lowered their voices into respectful murmurs. Victor Kane didn't walk in. He arrived, like a storm that expected the world to step aside. Tall, sharply dressed, his expression carved from stone. He carried the confidence of a man who believed he owned everything he looked at. And in many ways, he did that. He was the billionaire every headline worshipped. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable, than a man who built empires and crushed competitors without blinking. But there was something else about him, something colder. He never looked at people, only through them, like they were furniture, not humans. Tonight, Sarah prayed to remain invisible more than ever. She kept her distance, hiding behind tables, slipping around corners, hoping someone else would handle his service. But fate doesn't negotiate with the timid. Sarah, her supervisor, hissed, panic in his eyes. Table 7. Victor Kane is requesting immediate service. And smile, for the love of God. Her stomach dropped. Out of all nights, out of all people, out of all tables. Still, she nodded. She always nodded. Quiet Sarah. Reliable Sarah. Invisible Sarah. She steadied her breath and walked toward the table where Kane sat alone, scrolling through messages, eyes sharp with annoyance, as if the world had already disappointed him today. She approached softly, placing a fresh glass of water in front of him. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't even pause his scrolling to him. She simply did not exist. Sarah turned to leave, but fate, cruel and precise, struck at the smallest moment. A passing waiter brushed against her shoulder, just enough to nudge her arm, just enough for a few drops of water to spill over Kane's hand. Not a glass, not a splash, just tiny droplets, but the world went silent, completely silent. Victor Kane froze, his jaw tightened. His head lifted slowly, the way predators lift their heads before they strike. His eyes locked on Sarah with cold, surgical fury, and with that one look she knew he wasn't angry about water. He was angry that someone had dared to exist in his space, in a voice loud enough to make every guest turn. He said, "Are you stupid?" Sarah stepped back, heart sinking. I'm so sore." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor like a warning. "Don't talk. Just listen." The staff froze. Guests stared. Even the music seemed to lower itself. Kane continued, voice dripping with disgust. "This is what happens when restaurants hire uneducated, useless nobodies. People who can't manage a simple glass of water." Sarah felt her chest tighten, embarrassment burning her cheeks. She wanted to vanish, disappear. She was good at that, being nothing. But Victor wasn't finished. He raised his voice even more, making sure everyone heard. "You think you belong here?" he sneered. "You don't. People like you don't belong anywhere except under someone's boot." A murmur rippled across the restaurant that a couple exchanged worried glances. Another guest looked away, uncomfortable. Kane leaned closer, lowering his voice but sharpening it. "You're replaceable. Do you understand that? A body in an apron. Nothing more." Sarah swallowed. Her vision blurred for a moment. People didn't usually see her at all, but being seen like this, being belittled, mocked, exposed, it hurt in a different way. Still, she whispered, "I apologize, sir." He laughed, loud, cruel, echoing. "You apologize because you have nothing else to offer. No education, no intelligence, no future." Each word was a knife. Not because they were true, but because he believed them with such arrogance. He wanted her small, humiliated, broken. The room waited for her collapse, for her tears, for her silence. But something inside her shifted, quietly, like a curtain being lifted. A voice she had buried for years began pushing up through her fear. She stared at Victor Kane, breathing deeply. Something awakening in her expression, that a flicker of the girl she used to be. The brilliant one, the ambitious one, the one who refused to be reduced to nothing. But she didn't speak yet. Not here. Not now. Not while the billionaire still believed she was invisible. Kane turned away dismissively, waving his hand. "Give me someone competent," he snapped to the manager. "I don't want this thing anywhere near my table again." This thing. Sarah felt the words like a punch. The restaurant watched her, waiting, expecting her to walk away in shame. But tonight wasn't just another night. Tonight, the world was about to learn who she truly was. And Victor Kane, the man who mocked her, was seconds away from being humbled by the waitress he thought was nothing. 8 months, 0.8 long months of swallowing her pride, lowering her eyes, biting her tongue, and letting the world treat her like background noise. Sarah Chun had endured insults, assumptions, careless words from careless people, because invisibility was safer, because quiet meant survival. But something about Victor Kane's voice, about being called this thing, about all the people watching her like she deserved it. Something inside her finally cracked. That it wasn't anger that rose first, that it was grief. Grief for the girl she used to be. The girl who believed she could change the world, speak to leaders, negotiate peace, use her languages to build bridges. The girl who had worked until her fingers cramped and her eyes blurred. The girl who sacrificed everything, only to be reduced to a shadow. She felt that old version of herself stirring, bruised but not dead, silent but not gone. And then she lifted her head, slowly. Deliberately, a whisper fell across the room. Sarah's eyes met Victor Kane's. Not with fear, but with clarity. Even Kane froze, confused for the first time, because the invisible girl was suddenly looking straight through him. "I think," Sarah said softly, "you're mistaken." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the restaurant like glass. Kane blinked. "What did you just say?" She stepped forward, shoulders straightening with the dignity she had buried for far too long. "I said," she repeated, "you're mistaken." The manager gasped. A couple at the next table leaned in. Phones were already being lifted, discreetly recording. Kane scoffed. "Do you think you can talk back to me now?" Sarah didn't flinch. "For 8 months I stayed silent," she said. Not because I'm uneducated, but because peace is easier than pride. Kane rolled his eyes. Oh, God. Here we go. I have 2 degrees, Mr. Kane. Her voice sharpened. International relations and linguistics. A ripple went through the room that a man at table 4 whispered, "No way." A woman near the bar lifted her brows in shock. Sarah continued, calm as steel. And I speak 5 languages fluently. Kane opened his mouth to laugh, but she didn't let him. She switched instantly into flawless French, correcting the exact business term he had mispronounced earlier during a phone call. Several French-speaking guests gasped. Then she shifted to Mandarin, effortlessly reciting one of the phrases Kane had butchered in a recent interview that a Chinese investor at the back sat up in disbelief. Without pausing, she flowed into Korean, then Spanish, then German, each transition seamless, each sentence a blade. Every language, every word, every moment made the billionaire shrink just a little more, that Kane's face flushed with embarrassment. What? What are you doing? He sputtered. Sarah finally returned to English. I'm showing you something, she said softly. That the world you stand on isn't built on power, but on people you never look at. The restaurant fell into complete silence. Kane tried to recover. You think speaking a few languages makes you special? Sarah tilted her head. No, but it does make me educated. A soft murmur of agreement flowed through the room. Kane inhaled sharply, panicking now, though he tried to hide it, because for the first time, someone he considered beneath him had pushed back, and the room wasn't laughing with him anymore. Sarah wasn't done. Not even close. She took a breath, steadying herself. She had been quiet for too long. Now the truth was ready to climb out of hiding. Mr. Kane, she said, you didn't just insult a waitress tonight. Her eyes locked with his. You insulted your last shield, your last silence, your last escape. Kane frowned. What are you talking about? Sarah's posture straightened, and a quiet strength radiated through her. Because she wasn't going to just defend herself. She was going to expose him. The restaurant leaned in. Kane swallowed. This was the moment a billionaire would fall, because the girl he thought was invisible was finally, undeniably seen. Victor Kane's confidence wavered. A small fracture, but unmistakable. For the first time in his life, he wasn't controlling the room. The room was watching her. Sarah placed her hands on the table, steady and calm. If you want to talk about intelligence, she said, then let's talk about yours. Kane stiffened. What does that mean? Sarah took a breath. The kind people take before walking in a fire. I know who you are, she said quietly. And more importantly, I know what you've done. The atmosphere snapped so sharply that even the candles seemed to flicker. Phones rose higher. A few investors leaned forward slowly, sensing danger. Kane forced a laugh. You? A waitress? What could you possibly know? Sarah didn't flinch. She spoke clearly, firmly, the way a diplomat would present evidence. 3 years ago, she began, you buried a lawsuit from a family-owned company you destroyed with predatory acquisitions. A man at a nearby table whispered, that case was sealed. Not sealed, Sarah corrected. Reclassified. After you paid them just enough to survive, but not enough to recover. Kane's breath hitched. His eyes darted around the restaurant. Now full of witnesses, Sarah continued. Then there was the settlement with your former CFO. You threatened her family to stop her from publishing your accounting discrepancies. Kane slammed his hand on the table. Stop talking. But Sarah couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had endured. And last month, she said, the charity scandal. Her voice pierced the air. You funneled donations into shell companies. Money meant for orphanages ended up in offshore accounts. Someone gasped audibly. One of Kane's own investors, seated only 2 tables away, slowly stood up, face pale. Is this true, Victor? He demanded. Kane didn't answer, couldn't answer. Panic flickered across his face. He was losing control of the narrative, something he never allowed. Sarah folded her hands calmly. You want to talk about education? She said softly. Then let's talk about yours. The kind you hide. Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Then, she switched languages again. In French. She recited the exact phrasing of a corruption report filed in Europe. A report Kane had quietly made disappear. In Mandarin. She translated a leaked email chain between Kane and a Chinese lobbyist at IN German. She quoted the penalties his company faced for environmental violations at IN Spanish. She detailed the forced relocation of workers at one of his factories. Every language was a hammer, every sentence a demolition. The investors were no longer shocked. They were horrified. Phones buzzed. Notifications popped. Live streams were quietly started. Point one investor whispered, "Pull out." Now, another muttered, "He's finished." A third dialed a number with trembling hands. "Cancel tomorrow's signing." All of it. Kane's empire was crumbling in real time, in front of the woman he had mocked. You don't know what you're talking about." Kane shouted desperately. "You're just making things up. No one will believe." "They already do," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was steady, deadly. "And do you want to know why?" She leaned closer. "Because I gave them what you never do, the truth." Kane looked around wildly, but there were no allies left. Not one. Even the manager stepped forward, hesitant but resolute. "Mr. Kane," he said, "I think you should leave." Kane stared at him in disbelief. "You're siding with her?" The manager swallowed. "For 8 months, she worked harder than anyone here. And tonight, she showed more courage than I've seen in my entire career." The restaurant staff nodded. Guests clapped softly at first, then louder, rising like a wave. Not a cheer or recognition, but a tribute. Victor Kane, billionaire, untouchable, feared, stumbled back as the applause grew, his face drained of color, his empire shaking, his future collapsing. Sarah bowed her head for a moment, overwhelmed by the support she never expected to feel again. The invisible girl had not only spoken, she had roared. Kane pushed past the tables, humiliated, broken, exposed for the first time in his life. He had to run, because a waitress had dismantled him in 5 minutes. With languages, with truth, with courage, Sarah stood still, breathing deeply, letting the applause wash over her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't silent. She wasn't small. Tonight, she became the woman she always was, and the world finally saw her. For a long moment after Victor Kane fled the restaurant, Sarah simply stood there, still, steady, her heart pounding against her ribs. The applause faded into a soft hum, and the air shifted again. But this time, not because a billionaire had entered. This time, it shifted because a woman who had hidden for too long finally stepped into the light. The manager approached her cautiously. "Sarah," he whispered, unsure. "Are you okay?" For the first time in 8 months, she smiled. Not politely, not out of obligation, but with the kind of warmth that comes from reclaiming yourself. "I think I'll be," she said, and then her phone buzzed. Once, then again, then continuously, a stream of alerts lighting up the screen. At first she thought it was a mistake. Spam. Random notifications. But when she checked, her breath caught. Law firms were reaching out. "We saw what happened. If you need representation, we will take your case pro bono." Journalists were contacting her. "Your courage is extraordinary. We'd like an interview." Ethics boards, corporate watchdogs, and former Kane employees were sending messages of gratitude, relief, hope. And then, a familiar name appeared. Someone she thought she'd never hear from again. Her former mentor. The woman who once told her she belonged at the United Nations. "Sarah, is that really you? I always knew your voice would matter. Call me." Sarah inhaled sharply. Her eyes stung. But the whirlwind wasn't done. Within the hour, while she still stood in her apron, surrounded by stunned staff and teary-eyed guests, 7 different companies contacted her with official job offers, diplomacy, linguistics, international mediation, a research fellowship she once dreamed of but never pursued. Point one message read simply, "We've been looking for someone like you." But the most unexpected moment came when a soft voice approached her from behind. It was the elegant woman who had been sitting at Victor Kane's table earlier. The only person who had looked uncomfortable while he unleashed his cruelty. She placed an envelope in Sarah's hand. "This is for you," she said gently. "Not because you stood up to him, but because you stood up for yourself." Sarah hesitated, confused. When she opened the envelope, she gasped out a check. $20,000. Her hands trembled. I can't accept. You can," the woman insisted, smiling softly. "And you should. You earned it with bravery most people never find in a lifetime. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She hugged the envelope to her chest, overwhelmed, humbled. The restaurant staff gathered around her. People who once barely noticed her were now treating her like a hero because she was one. But the most important shift wasn't happening around her. It was happening inside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like she had to hide to survive, that a weight she had carried alone. The weight of her broken dreams, her lost ambitions, her fear, finally lifted. She untied her apron slowly, almost ceremonially, folded it neatly, placed it on the counter. Then she walked toward the front door of Golden Terrace. Not sneaking, not hiding, not shrinking. She walked like a woman who knew exactly who she was again. Outside, the city lights reflected off the glass, painting her face in gold. The world that once ignored her was now waiting for her. Ready for her, she stepped out into the night, strong, seen, transformed, and free. Sarah Chun was invisible no more, and she would never, ever disappear again. Silence can feel safe, but in reality, it's a cage that slowly takes away who you are. The moment Sarah finally chose to speak, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth, her entire world shifted. The billionaire who mocked her lost everything he built on lies. But Sarah, she found the courage she thought she'd buried forever. She found her future. She found herself. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Your voice will always be stronger than your fear, and somewhere out there, the world is waiting to hear it.